So, why talk about the history of the soul? Well, to me, we can't talk about soul health. We cannot talk about our soul's evolution unless we really understand what the ancients believed about the soul and what the ancients lived through their soul in general. So, if you think about ancient civilizations, they lived and breathed the soul. Every second of their day was about how they could develop, every second was about how they could get to the other side. Every second was about how they could live in communal living with other souls that were in their communities and how they could work together to thrive, to survive, all of the above. And so, why am I talking about the history of the soul now? It's because we have lost connection with our soul in general. And so, it's really important for us to look back at the history and say, okay, how did it begin? Where did we go? And where did we go wrong? And how do we get back to alignment? And I'm going to be using that word a lot because to me, alignment is about aligning with your own soul. And when we align with that inner self, when align with that essence of who we are and really know who that person is, who that soul is, that's when we are able to understand how and why we need to connect with other souls as well. And many cultures, I think these days, unfortunately, from a modern living perspective, live from the outside in, meaning that they take in so much societal thought, they take in so much governmental thought, they take in so much religious thought, they take in so much from the outside, and they've lost connection with their own soul and what life means to them. And so, really living through the soul means flipping that and living from the inside out to the point where, again, you can commune with the others in your world, but it's basically feeling very grounded, feeling very at ease, feeling very sure of who you are. And that's what's so interesting is ancient cultures taught this all the time. Ancient cultures taught how to align with themselves because aligning with yourself is basically in their thought how you get to the other side, meaning how do you go on through that continual process of evolution? Because most ancient cultures didn't believe in heaven. This is a new concept. Most ancient cultures believed that they were going to cycle back, that they were going to come back, that they were going to come back to live a next life, whatever that means. So reincarnation has been around far longer than modern religion has when they say we're just going to heaven. And we're going to talk about that in a second too, because the words heaven and hell have a very interesting original meaning that has nothing to do with what really we believe now. So I'm going to go back and talk about the structures. So if you look at the ancient structures, you look at the pyramids, you look at the stone circles, you look at the mounds that are in the European area, you look in South America at some of the structures there, some of the temples, some of the pyramids that are there. You look at Native American traditions, you look at their structures. You can look anywhere around the world and find that most of these ancient structures are somehow aligned with the stars. They're somehow aligned with the solstice and how the sun shines at a certain time. They're aligned with many of the constellations that are in the sky. There is a lot of research coming out right now that they're finding many of the ancient structures are laid out in the same position as the stars that are in the constellation Orion. So we have lots and lots of evidence that our ancient civilizations used the soul and astrology and other kinds of spiritual kinds of methods uh, to live their lives. So it was all about how they lived, and it was a much more communal kind of living. You never heard about the infighting that we're having in our country right now. You never heard about that kind of discourse because basically there were civilizations that were all doing the same thing, just in different parts of the world. So then we look at the traditions. Every ancient tradition really talked about reincarnation, talked about how the soul is eternal, how the soul just keeps going on and on and on. The Egyptians, way back when I was in grade school, I studied mummification. I thought it, again, from a very young age, I was very fascinated with it and realized that mummification in Egypt was basically all about how do you get to the other side? How do you continue this life? How do you get to where you're supposed to be from this next life perspective? Same thing with mummification anywhere else in the world. It's the same thing. It's how do you preserve the body and honor that body that held the soul? And basically, the belief was that it got the soul to the other side. It basically honored that person's soul. How do we go back to the belief system in terms of what they worshiped? Again, many of these, actually, all of these ancient societies worshiped the solstice in some way, worshiped equinox in some way, worshiped the moon in other ways. And so, there's this whole connection with souls in the universe that was very evident from the very, very beginning, from what we have historical data from. And so we have to think about how in the world do we get to where we are now, which is a very soulless society. We are a very soulless society. And yet there is growing evidence that people are really wanting to look more into the soul. And I'm going to talk about that in a second too. But I want to go back to this whole idea of living through the soul in every way, in an every day, in an every second, because that is how our ancient societies used to live. Everything was such a soulful experience. How they ate food, how they caught their animals. They were very soulful, even in the killing of these animals for their food. How was it that they practiced ritual? Well, it was a very soulful practice. And so if you look at any of the ancient civilizations, they lived and breathed the soul. It was just part of who they were. They didn't have to think about, oh gosh, what is the soul? Because they lived it. They knew that the essence of who they were at the time was so important, not only in how they interacted with other individuals, but how they interacted with themselves and how they could live their best life, for whatever that meant back in their ancient days, so they could get to that place of feeling content. And, I've said for years that the soul's most natural state is joy and contentment. Look how much joy and contentment we have in our current world. Not very much. And it's because we are so misaligned from that inner part of us. We're so misaligned. And so, again, living from the outside in is not where we need to go. We need to flip this back to living from the inside out. And that does mean oneness. That does not mean that we diss our neighbor. That doesn't mean that we disregard family. What that means is that if we live from the inside out, we live from that soulful perspective, we're going to invite those other souls into our lives anyway because they're doing the same thing. That's where oneness begins. That's where this whole energetic weaving of souls begins. But we've become, again, so disconnected. We've become so misaligned from our inner self that it is almost impossible to connect with the masses around us because they're disconnected as well. So there's that. So I want to talk a little bit about heaven and hell for a moment because I'm kind of a word junkie. Obviously, I'm a little bit of a historical junkie because I look at these ancient civilizations, these sacred sites. I travel to sacred sites to study kind of the understanding of spirituality at the time. But the whole idea of heaven and hell are very new terms, reasonably speaking. What I mean by that is the very first meaning of the word heaven was big sky. The very first meaning of the word hell was to keep hidden. So these are very different meanings from how they have evolved to today. Now, I would almost call it devolved from what they first meant. But it's this whole idea that heaven and hell are very different concepts, excuse me, than what they first began as. So, ancient civilizations didn't think about heaven and hell. They were thinking about the continual process of life. They were trying to figure out how to continue in life in a way that was sound and worthy and moral. We're very far off from that. Excuse me. But it's this whole idea of we need to look at the history to look at, wow, do we need to reconfigure our current thoughts? Because modern day thinking is obviously taking us off course. Otherwise, the world would not be where it is today. So, this whole idea of terminology and religious terminology is fascinating. Now, I also want to talk about kind of the current beliefs, how things are evolving, and how the soul is kind of coming full circle again, how people are starting to look at the soulful ideas and wanting to weave them back into life, regardless of what their religious beliefs are. Now, number one, in 2012, there was a mass exodus from churches. Millions of people left churches, and a lot of that was the beginning. And now they're saying that about 2.7 million people in our country leave religion every year, leave churches every year. So that's pretty significant if that started around 2012. And then basically the statistics are that they keep losing people. Most churches, as of last year, did not, I think it was between, let me think here, 2020 and 22, didn't gain new parishioners. They didn't. Now, part of that was the pandemic, but the thing that's interesting is those people aren't going back. So whatever they were going to church for before, they're not going back. The other statistics that are very interesting is that reincarnation in the soul is on the rise. So reincarnation, the ideas of reincarnation, the beliefs in reincarnation, 45% of almost 45% of even Christians believe in reincarnation. 45% of people across the board believe in reincarnation. Now, they may never talk about it, given that they either don't have a place to talk about it or that they really can't talk about it in their churches. So 45%, and that is growing steadily over the last 20 years. So we have had this upsurge of people that are admitting, wow, yeah, I'm looking into the soul, I'm looking into reincarnation. The shamanic practitioners are growing massively as far as numbers. In fact, in the UK and in the whole England region, shamanic practitioners is basically becoming the number one new religion. It is basically gaining very fast as far as the popularity and the interest in astrology. 67% of millennials are actually using astrology to guide their lives and help them make decisions. I think it was like 87% of people in the United States now know a little bit more about their astrological sign, not just what's in the what used to be in the newspaper. It's not just the horoscope. It's really understanding more and more about astrology in general. Energy work, which to me is related to the soul. Energy work is on the rise. Hundreds of different forms of energy work. We have sound healing. We have all these psychedelic journey and all these kinds of things that are happening right now. Why is that? Well, it's because people are slowly realizing they need more meaning in their lives. They need more connection with themselves. They need to get back to what they may or may not know is the soul. They need to go back to the essence of who they are and figure out why their lives are feeling so misaligned. So I presented all of this information at a conference just last week, and it was basically a state what was it, a state convention or a state conference for mental health practitioners, and there was a beautiful, beautiful array of people there. So that was a really wonderful kind of thing. But I presented all this information, and what was so interesting is that there it was a room full of people, and what was so interesting about it is that we had such a wonderful conversation. So many people asked questions. So many people were nodding and throwing in, yeah, and this is what I'm seeing in my practice, and this is what I'm hearing. And so, even though they don't have a framework to know how to teach their clients or help their clients, they're realizing that there's more out there. They're realizing that the soul has to re-enter the healing process. Now, I seriously doubt this is happening as much in the medical field because number one, they're not trained to at all. They don't have the time to dig into deep and meaningful kind of conversation with their patients. But at least in the mental health field, this is on the rise. This is in a place that it is on the rise. People are looking for it. And whether or not practitioners even know to ask about it, they can be assured that many of their clients are already looking into issues related to the soul. And again, to me, it's music to my ears because we are bringing full circle where we came from, where we first began, where we came from in ancient society. So talking about the history of the soul is super important and imperative for us to understand why the soul even is so important in our day-to-day living. And that's also why I talk about bringing ancient wisdom to the modern soul. It's bringing back where we became from, or where we came from, but basically knowing how to integrate it into our lives now because this stuff is happening out there. The statistics are clear that the soul is back on the rise. If you think about the number of times you've heard the soul in songs recently in the last 10 years, you're noticing there's a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Oprah Winfrey was wonderful at bringing the soul back. Super Soul Sunday, talking about soulful topics, talking about reincarnation on her show, talking about all these things that again needed to have their seals cracked. We needed to bring all of this back. And now it's a matter of how do we bring it back into our individual lives? How do we bring the soul back into understanding that every breath we take is soul-based. Every action that we have is soul-based. Every emotion we have is soul-based. And so this is why I'm teaching practitioners more about this. This is why I have these certifications that I've created for practitioners and coaches and educators, because I want to help people understand how to use this information for their clients because their clients are already digging into this stuff and they might as well meet them in the middle and help them along their way in their healing process or their evolution. This is why I'm speaking at conferences. This is why I'm doing these YouTube videos. This is basically my own soul's mission and path, is to get the soul back to where it needs to be. So again, talking about the history is all about talking about now, really. We have to talk about where all of this evolved or devolved and how we can get back to where we need to be so that we can create a better life for ourselves. One of the speakers at the conference said something that had nothing to do with the soul as far as she was thinking, but she worked in the public service industry and public mental health. And she was talking about the whole idea of, we are here as practitioners to help people lead their best lives. And we have to learn how to do that in any way possible. And as far as I'm concerned, we can't help a person lead their best life and live their best life unless we talk about the soul, unless we understand the soul. Even if you never talk about it with a client, you have to understand it for yourself to understand that this is what is wounded. This is what needs work. This is what's been fragmented or fractured or traumatized or wounded in either this lifetime or previous lifetimes. And this is where we have to go. We have to go look at the soul from the past to look at how to integrate it into the future. So this is to me why the history of the soul is so important. This is why I'm so passionate about it. This is why I'm going to do everything in my power to bring the soul back, because of the fact that we obviously aren't living our best lives now as a group or as individuals, and we've got to bring this essence back. We have to bring this back to a place where we can align with ourselves so we can align with others. So I hope this information was interesting and helpful and maybe thought-provoking for you. Do the research. You can type in ancient structures and astrology. You can type in kind of the statistics of what's happening in the world of spirituality from behind the scenes. And I think you're going to find a lot of that data out there. But I think the thing is, this Soul 101 series is all about enlightening people, bringing the soul back, really talking about a smattering of different topics that will help you kind of reintegrate the soul into your life. Because again, every breath, every thought, every reaction, every emotion is all soul-based. We just don't realize it. And again, this is why I want to bring this back. So hope this information was helpful. More to come. If you have suggestions for what you want to hear about, just let me know and I can try to weave that into some of these videos. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.